Picture this. It's 1177, the height of the Crusades. The air in the Holy Land is thick with tension. In August, a glimmer of hope arrives for the Crusaders. Philip of Alsace, Count of Flanders, sails into Acre with a massive Byzantine fleet. The plan: a grand campaign to retake Egypt from the legendary Sultan Saladin. This could be a game-changer, a decisive blow against the Ayyubid dynasty. But as often happens in history, politics got in the way. Philip, a powerful European noble, had his own ambitions. He expected to be handed control of Egypt, a demand that the young king of Jerusalem, Baldwin IV, flatly refused. Baldwin, despite being just 16 and afflicted with leprosy, was no one's puppet. He was the crowned king, and he wasn't about to give away a potential prize like Egypt to a visiting cousin, no matter how influential. The dispute escalated. The Grand Council of Jerusalem's nobles sided with their king, and the dream of an Egyptian campaign evaporated. The Byzantine fleet, seeing the plan fall apart, sailed for home. Frustrated, Philip of Alsace didn't just pack up and leave. He took his large contingent of knights and headed north. He decided to campaign in the territories of the Principality of Antioch and the county of Tripoli, joining forces with local lords like Raymond of Tripoli and Bohemond of Antioch. This wasn't just a small group. Philip's departure meant a significant portion of the Kingdom of Jerusalem's military strength, including many Templar and Hospitaller knights, was now hundreds of miles away from the kingdom's heartland. The south was left dangerously exposed, and who was watching this all unfold with keen interest? None other than Saladin. From his base in Egypt, his intelligence network was superb. He knew the Byzantine fleet had departed. He knew Philip and a huge chunk of the Crusader army were busy in the north. He saw a golden opportunity. The kingdom of Jerusalem was like a ripe fruit, its defenders scattered to the winds. For Saladin, the time to strike was now. He began to gather his formidable army, a force that dwarfed anything the remaining Crusaders could hope to muster. His target was clear: the holy city of Jerusalem itself. With the bulk of his forces, Saladin marched out of Egypt and crossed into Crusader territory. His army was a fearsome sight, numbering in the tens of thousands, a mix of elite Mamluk cavalry, experienced soldiers, and auxiliaries. His first major obstacle was the southern frontier of the kingdom, guarded by the fortress city of Ashkelon. And who was there to meet him? The young leper king, Baldwin IV. News of Saladin's invasion had reached Jerusalem, causing widespread panic. But Baldwin didn't panic. Despite his debilitating illness, which had by now robbed him of the use of one hand and was beginning to affect his legs, his spirit was unbreakable. He refused to sit by and watch his kingdom be overrun. He did the unthinkable. He had himself lifted onto his horse and declared he would ride out to face Saladin himself. It was a desperate gamble. Baldwin could only scrape together a tiny force. We're talking a few hundred knights, maybe a couple thousand infantry at most. He had with him some of the most formidable warriors of the era, like Reynold of Chatillon, the aggressive lord of Transjordan, and the masters of the military orders who had remained behind. He raced south, hoping to make a stand at the fortress of Ashkelon before Saladin could bypass it and march straight for the undefended capital. When Baldwin and his small army reached Ashkelon, they found themselves trapped. Saladin's massive force quickly surrounded the city. The Sultan was confident. He had the Christian king and his best knights bottled up. He detached part of his army to keep Ashkelon under siege, while he and the main body continued their march inland. He allowed his troops to spread out, to raid and plunder the countryside. Why not? The Crusader army was neutralized, and the path to Jerusalem lay open. In his mind, the campaign was already won. He made a critical error. He underestimated the will and tactical brilliance of his young, sick adversary. Inside Ashkelon, Baldwin was not idle. He knew he couldn't stay besieged forever. He sent an urgent message to the Knights Templar garrison at Gaza, another fortress Saladin had bypassed, urging them to break out and join him. The Templars, renowned for their courage, slipped through the enemy lines and managed to reinforce the king at Ashkelon. The arrival of these elite warriors was a huge morale boost. But even with the Templars, Baldwin's army was still hopelessly outnumbered. A direct confrontation was suicide. They needed an edge, a way to turn the tables. And that's where local knowledge became the key to victory. One of the nobles with Baldwin was Balian of Ibelin, a lord whose family lands were in this very region. He knew every hill, every valley, every path. He knew a way to get out of Ashkelon, undetected, and catch Saladin's army by surprise. The plan was audacious. They would use the coastal dunes and hidden trails to shadow Saladin's army, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Leading his men out of Ashkelon, Baldwin began a daring march. They moved along the coast, using the terrain to hide their movements from Saladin's scouts. The Sultan, meanwhile, continued his leisurely advance toward Jerusalem. His army spread out and disorganized, completely unaware that the prey he thought he'd trapped was now hunting him. Saladin's destination was a place called Montgisard, a hill near the town of Ramla. He believed he had all the time in the world. He was about to get the shock of his life. On the morning of November 25, 1177, Saladin's army was strung out, crossing a stream in a narrow ravine near They were vulnerable, complacent, and not expecting a fight. Suddenly, from over a nearby crest, the Crusader army appeared. It was a terrifying, almost supernatural sight. At their head was King Baldwin, his face bandaged to hide the effects of his leprosy, riding at the forefront of his knights. Next to him was a bishop carrying a relic of the true cross, its presence inspiring the Christian soldiers to a fever pitch of religious fervor. With a deafening roar, the Crusader heavy cavalry charged. It was a classic, devastating Frankish charge, a human avalanche of steel and fury. They slammed into the side of Saladin's unsuspecting army. The Mamluk vanguard, including Saladin's own personal bodyguard, was hit first and shattered completely. Panic ripped through the Ayyubid ranks. Soldiers who had been casually marching and looting moments before were now caught in a The terrain that had seemed so harmless was now a bottleneck, preventing them from forming a proper battle line or retreating effectively. Saladin himself was caught in the chaos. He fought bravely to rally his men, but it was useless. The Crusader knights, led by their indomitable boy king, were unstoppable. They carved through the disorganized enemy, their lances and swords finding their marks. Raynald of Chatelain and the Ibelin brothers were in the thick of the fighting, leading their men with reckless abandon. Saladin saw his bodyguard cut to pieces, his nephew killed, and his army disintegrating before his eyes. Realizing the battle was lost, Saladin had no choice but to flee for his life. He mounted a swift racing camel and escaped the battlefield with only a handful of his closest companions. The retreat was a nightmare. What was left of his grand army was pursued relentlessly by the Crusaders and harassed by local Bedouins. They had to cross the Sinai desert with little food or water. Of the tens of thousands of soldiers who had invaded the kingdom with such confidence, only a tiny fraction made it back to Egypt. It was a catastrophe for Saladin, one of the worst defeats of his entire military career. Back on the battlefield, the Crusaders stood victorious, but exhausted. They had won an impossible victory. The 16-year-old leper king had faced down the most powerful ruler in the Muslim world and utterly defeated him. The legend of Baldwin IV was forged that day at He was hailed as a hero, a saintly warrior whose faith and courage had saved his kingdom from certain destruction. The victory gave the kingdom of Jerusalem a crucial decade of breathing room, a testament to the fact that in war, leadership, courage, and a little bit of audacity can sometimes triumph over even the most overwhelming odds. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this piece of crusading history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of courage and conflict from the medieval world. See you next time.